Hello there. Welcome to the Saraway channel wherever you are in the world. And so much love to each and every one of you. I hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and hugs to everybody. And go and get yourself something lovely to drink because we're on the third part of our story tonight, which is extremely intriguing. What we've learned is that Mr. and Mrs. Farnborough purchased a plot of land, 18 acres, very close to the town of Jasper, where there is a beautiful lake, smouldering mountain views, exquisite idyllic scenery. A cabin used to be on the property, but that's been taken down, and in its place, the Farnboroughs have built their beautiful new home. They do know, of course, that the previous owner was found on the property in the wood grove, hanging from a tree. He was dead, but the death has been considered to be extremely suspicious. And of course, there is a suspect concerning the death, and that is the man who owned the property, his sister Caitlin, who is considered likely to be involved in his demise in some way or another. So now we're getting on to part 3 of our story tonight, and we're going to find out where a Bigfoot comes into the story as well. And who did kill Russell Dyer? Let's find out, shall we? But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. I'm glad to say that in the weeks that followed, Verity Walker became a much-loved fixture and fitting in our household. I could see she developed a close bond to my wife Frida. Despite the sizable generation gap between the two of them, they appeared to be getting on famously. Our beautiful household was filled with much joyful laughter. Verity would take my wife shopping in Jasper regularly. She also introduced my wife to many of her friends. Frida accompanied her to art classes where she was learning how to paint some really lovely scenes of the mountains and trees. Many of those pictures hang on the walls in my home today. I do recall a year after we'd moved into our home, that even before the dawn had broken, there was a very loud banging at our front door. And I remember thinking to myself, who in the hell would be waking us up at this God-forsaken, godless hour of the morning? I walked over to the front door in my dressing gown and slippers, feeling slightly affronted and aggrieved for being so rudely disturbed. My wife followed behind me, mumbling under her breath about how she hated being woken up so early, and who could it be that was disturbing us so early in the morning? Frida, our next-door neighbour, was standing in the doorway, with her 6-year-old son Jacob and 3-year-old daughter Mallory, all who were wearing pyjamas and slippers at the time. Their eyes were very wide, and Verity looked extremely excited, as if she was bursting at the seams to tell us something. She looked quite the sight, though, with her red hair hanging around her face like a wild tangle of red foliage in autumn, and her blue eyes on stalks. Even her own children seemed more composed than she was. It seemed her husband Seb was fast asleep in his bed, unaware of all the excitement that was burgeoning in his household, rather like an out-of-control wildfire. I glanced briefly at the clock in the hall. It was 5 o'clock in the morning, and I wondered what on earth could have made Verity this excited. She was, of course, by nature an effervescent woman, but this morning her enthusiasm was palpable. "Can I come in?" she said, not even waiting for an invitation, as she and her kids just broke through our front door like 3 unbridled wild horses. My wife Frida told Verity to calm down as she put on the kettle, but Verity was not to be calmed, nor did she want to sit down. She remained standing and was breathless as she spoke. "Something extraordinary has happened. Absolutely extraordinary. You're not going to believe it. You're not going to believe it," she said. "Look at me. I'm shaking all over like a leaf. Look at my arm," she said, lifting up her arm to show us, which appeared to be trembling. "It's all so extraordinary. I can't believe this happened. I can't believe it. It's so surreal. It feels as if I'd been caught up in a dream." "Go on," I said, realizing that every second word that was coming out of Verity's mouth was the word extraordinary, as if her verbal diarrhea consisted of flabbergast, extraordinary, I'm in shock, I can't believe it. If she had something exciting to tell us, I just wished she'd get on with it. Finally, Verity managed to compose herself, if that was at all possible. "Well, this morning I heard the dogs barking very loudly in the kitchen. They were making such a commotion. It woke everyone up except Seb, of course, because he could sleep through a whirlwind and wouldn't get up. The squawking was so loud, so I quickly dashed down our staircase. I opened the glass sliding doors on our wraparound porch. My kids had woken up and were following me. We have 2 Burmese cats, but you know that. And one of the squeals was coming from one of my cats. That was when I realised a coyote had our beautiful cat Shadow in his jaws. How that happened, God only knows. I don't want to know either. In that moment I thought it was the last we'd ever see of our beloved Shadow, who had now become breakfast for this horrible coyote. I screamed because I was so terrified, because I loved that cat so very much. Jacob here, well, he went running after the coyote. He was crying out. He was calling Shadow and telling the coyote to leave Shadow well alone. Not that it was listening, of course. I was running after Jacob, trying to drag him back to the house. But he went right after that coyote. He was so fast, you know. I thought it was too late for poor Shadow, and that we had lost our cat for good. And then there he was. Oh, my God, I couldn't believe it. For a moment all the blood drained away from my face. I was so astounded. There is no other word to use. I was astounded.
Sorry, who was where? I asked. You're losing me.
Well, the most massive Bigfoot that I've ever seen. I didn't even believe Bigfoots were real, but there was no doubt in my mind what I was seeing. This thing, oh my God, he was huge, let me tell you, Kurt. Absolutely massive. You have no idea the size of this thing. He grabbed the coyote effortlessly with a powerful hand, lifting him in the air, and the coyote did a somersault, squealing out in terror, and it let go of Shadow, and Shadow ran straight back to the house. The Bigfoot put the coyote out of its misery, slinging it over its shoulders. I think he might be intending to eat it, I don't know. And then he glanced from me to Jacob. Isn't that right, Jacob? His eyes were so intelligent. The little boy nodded as he looked at me with wide eyes. He spoke to us, didn't he, Mummy? He spoke to us in our heads. He was a very nice Bigfoot, wasn't he, Mummy? He said that Shadow would be fine. He knew the name of our cat, Mr. Farnborough, because he's very clever.
Wow, I said. That is incredible. But are you sure the Bigfoot spoke to you?
I asked, feeling certain that Jacob's wild imagination was playing tricks on him, because there was no way a Bigfoot would know someone's cat's name. Surely not. It seemed a bit far-fetched to me, but I knew kids had a propensity to highly exaggerate things. I was there, said Verity excitedly. Don't look so doubtful, Kurt. I understand your cynicism, and I guess wearing your shoes I'd feel likely the same. But you have to believe us. I was there. I'm telling you, the Bigfoot spoke to all 3 of us. He told us Shadow would be fine. And he knew the cat's name. That cat was in the coyote's jaws, and there's not a mark on him. But yes, the Bigfoot spoke to us in our heads very clearly in an audible voice. We all heard it. Jacob nodded his head fiercely. He spoke to us, and he did know Shadow's name. The Bigfoot was very clever, you see, Mr. Farnborough. He knew things. Weren't you scared? My wife Erica interjected. I mean, you saw a Bigfoot. Aren't those things very dangerous? Aren't they supposed to attack human beings or something? I heard that people get killed by them, and that Bigfoots are dangerous. He wasn't scary, said Jacob insistently. He was nice, wasn't he, Mummy? Really friendly. Oh, he was nice. You could see the kindness in his eyes. There was nothing remotely aggressive about him. But he was huge, and in that regard he was intimidating, Verity agreed. How huge exactly? I asked. Little Jacob's eyes grew round again. As big as a tree, Mr. Farnborough. Verity chuckled. Don't exaggerate, Jacob. He wasn't as big as a tree, but he was very big. I guess he was about 9.5 foot tall. What did this Bigfoot look like? Asked my wife, suddenly becoming extremely intrigued. Well, he looked like a giant-sized human being, you could say. I mean, a cross between a human and a gorilla, perhaps. I say that because he had overlong arms, and of very powerful, robust build, with so much muscle definition. He was covered in long dark hair, and yes, he would have been incredibly scary, but everything with the coyote happened so fast. I mean, the Bigfoot just came out of nowhere, launched himself on the coyote. The coyote screamed, let go of Shadow, and it was over for him. I guess in that moment, I was too shell-shocked to really react. It was like being caught up in a bizarre situation when you're wondering if you might be dreaming. I don't think Jacob and I had time to be scared. Everything happened too fast for us to react. It was like watching a movie, you could say.
I can't believe you saw a Bigfoot, I said. I've heard of such creatures before, but I never knew whether to take such claims with a pinch of salt or not.
They are real, said Verity's little girl Mallory, that was looking at me earnestly with her wide blue eyes. I saw the Bigfoot too. I heard him speak in my head. He saved Shadow's life. If it weren't for Mr. Bigfoot, Shadow would be eaten by the coyote. A tear slipped down little Mallory's cheeks, and my wife picked her up, balancing her on her hip. And at 3 years old, I was amazed by this little girl's intelligence. I'm sure Shadow is a very clever cat, said my wife reassuringly. After a horrible scare like that, I'm sure he's going to be very careful where he goes from now on. It would appear that my wife's soothing words appeared to calm little Mallory down, who it was clear was very attached to Shadow. I remember for weeks after this rather peculiar event, Verity could talk about little else other than the Bigfoot she had encountered. She wanted to tell anybody who would listen that not all Bigfoots are aggressive, even if they might at first appear intimidating, as she had encountered one herself, and that Bigfoot had saved their cat's life. It was a year after this event that I started to notice some changes in my wife Frida that began to alarm me and were causing a great deal of concern. On one occasion I took my wife back to a restaurant in Jasper. We'd been to 6 times before, and she said, "What a lovely restaurant this is, isn't it? We must come here again." The way my wife was talking was as if this was the first time we'd ever visited this restaurant, when we'd been here so many times before. The woman who knew us well and who regularly waited at our table greeted my wife warmly, asking her how she was. My wife stared at her blankly and told me later that the woman serving us was acting like she knew us. My wife appeared to have no memory of the woman at all. One day when Frida was going into Jasper to meet up with a friend for coffee, she told me she couldn't find her car keys anywhere. I could see the car keys were in her hands, and when I pointed this out to her, she looked somewhat bemused, and then she said to me, "But why am I going to town in the first place? I can't remember. What was it I needed to do again?"
"You don't need to get anything," I assured her. "Remember, you're going to meet your friend Nicola in town. You're having coffee with her."
"Nicola?" she said to me. "Who is Nicola?"
"She's your good friend, love. Don't you remember? You told me that Verity introduced you to her at the art class you went to. You're meeting up with her in town for a coffee."
"Oh, yes, I remember," said my wife. "Silly me. How could I forget? I must be losing my mind. Where did you say I was going to again? Where am I going?" 3 days after my wife's bizarre behaviour, Verity arrived at my door, asking if she could speak to me alone in private. At the time, my wife was thankfully taking a long bath upstairs, so I quickly invited Verity into the house.
"What's up?" I asked. "You look troubled."
"I don't want to upset you, Kurt," she said to me, "because this is a very sensitive subject I need to discuss with you. But something's going on with your wife, Frida. She's not herself at the moment. She's behaving very strangely."
"What exactly do you mean?"
I asked, already preempting what she was going to tell me. "Well, the other day I met your wife up in town. We had lunch together. She seemed so distracted. She began playing with her serviette and chuckling to herself. And when I talked to her, half the time she wasn't even listening to me. It was as if she was caught up in her own little world. Then I asked her how you were doing. I said, 'How is Kurt?' And she looked at me and said, 'Who is Kurt?' I said, 'Your husband, of course, Frida.' And then she said, 'Oh, yes, he's fine.' We went off together to do some shopping after we ate at the restaurant. And then your wife suddenly said to me, I haven't eaten all day. I'm really hungry. When we'd only eaten moments before. I pointed this out to her, but she seemed to have forgotten all about the food we'd eaten. I think, Kurt, she needs to, see a doctor or something. Her memory lapses are extremely disturbing. I knew what Verity was telling me about Frida was true. The other day Frida had forgotten our dogs' names, and now she was forgetting whether she'd eaten or not at a restaurant. We had been so enjoying our lives as a retired couple in our beautiful new home, and now my wife was exhibiting signs of dementia. I needed this like a hole in my head, but I couldn't willfully ignore what was happening to my wife, so I needed to seek out medical advice. I made an appointment to see our primary physician, who after examining my wife referred her to a neurologist, who gave her a series of cognitive tests, brain scans, such as a CT scan, MRI, PET scan, and a CFS analysis. They did various blood tests on my wife, and our worst fears were finally confirmed when she was diagnosed with early stages of Alzheimer's. It came as quite the shock to me, but I'm not sure my wife really understood what was going on at this point, as shortly after she'd gone through all those tests, she'd forgotten all about them. Imagine if you're diagnosed with cancer, for example, and you're upset about the diagnosis, but later you forget all about it, as if it never happened. It was like that for Frida. I decided to put off telling my children what was going on with their mother, as I had to get my head around this first. I guess I felt if I articulated what was going on with my wife, it made the horrifying truth all the more brutal. I was finding myself beginning to take over the jobs my wife used to do, like the accounting, cooking and the shopping, as she seemed so distracted all the time, and couldn't be trusted in driving her car anymore, as she was increasingly forgetting things. She was beginning to gasp and grunt a lot, and more often or not she seemed to be caught up in her own world. These days she was even ignoring our dogs, that she had always loved so much. Verity came to see me after the results of my wife's tests came through. My wife at the time was fussing around in the bedroom upstairs, struggling to decide what sweater to wear. She had taken all her clothes out of the wardrobe, as making a decision like that was overwhelming for her. So tell me, what did the neurologist say? Verity asked me, but I think she knew by my grim expression that the news was not good. It's Alzheimer's, I told her. Verity threw her hand around her mouth. Are you sure? She asked. I nodded my head. Verity threw her arms around me, enveloping me in a big hug. Seb and I are here for you, Kurt. Don't forget that for a second. We'll help you in any way we can, I promise. I don't know what to say. I mean, 1 minute Frida was absolutely fine, and now her memory is all over the place. But the diagnosis is just so heartbreaking, isn't it? Well, when the neurologist viewed my wife's PET scans, there were significant changes to the brain. There was no doubt it was Alzheimer's. I just can't tell the kids about this. Not yet, anyway. Well, then don't do it, Kurt. Take your time to get your head around this first before you share this news with anyone else. In the meantime, I will help you in any way I possibly can. I have to tell you, I was completely crushed, learning that the woman I loved more than life itself was almost dying before my very eyes. Because this is what Alzheimer's does to the brain. And seeing my wife becoming confused and disorientated all the time was devastating, to say the very least. We had spent so many blissfully happy years together, dreaming about enjoying our retirement years in the Alberta countryside. And now I was losing my wife to this devastating disease, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. But I would be there to support her and encourage her in any way I could, even when she didn't know who I was anymore. It was heartbreaking as I slowly observed my wife's congenital decline that seemed to be rapidly getting worse and worse by the day. I don't think my wife was upset by her condition, as the trouble was that her memory being so impaired, well, she'd forgotten all about it. There were times she would acknowledge that something was intrinsically wrong with her, as she tried desperately to form sentences, and then she'd forget what she was trying to say. Verity was the most wonderful neighbour. She'd regularly come over to the house and watch over my wife for me, when I rushed off to town to pick up stuff. One day Verity was at my house with her 2 children, and got distracted by her son Jacob, when he was ambitiously climbing all over our kitchen countertops, and had succeeded in knocking over a big carton of milk and a box of Cocoa Pops all over the floor, creating quite a mess. In fact, so much so that Verity was distracted in cleaning it all up, while she reprimanded her 2 children for behaving like clowns. And when she'd calmed down, she realised to her horror that my wife Frida had simply disappeared and was nowhere to be found, and then she began to panic. Verity's account. Even before Kurt and Frida Farnborough had built their brand new home on the property next to ours, I knew that they would never have become our next-door neighbours if it hadn't been for the tragic, unforeseen passing of my friend Russell Dyer, who loved the 18-acre piece of land that he lived on, as if it was part of him. I was very sad when he was found hanging dead from a tree in the woodgrove, and the moment I learnt what had happened to him, even before the autopsy report had been thoroughly scrutinised, I knew the death was extremely suspicious, and I knew exactly who was responsible for his fortuitous demise. I was not surprised, of course, by the coroner's report on his death. She claimed that Russell Dyer's death was made to look like a suicide, as there were defensive wounds all over his body, which suggested he'd put up quite the fight before he was finally dragged away, kicking and screaming, to the tree, where he'd later be found hanging. The police suspected Caitlin Dyer was behind his suspicious passing, but they didn't have any evidence to accuse her of this crime. But everyone knew that in some insidious way, Caitlin Dyer had managed to kill her brother and get away with it. I absolutely believe this to be the truth. My guess is she hired a hitman to do the dirty deed, and to make Russell Dyer's tragic death look like a suicide. I had developed a firm friendship with Russell Dyer over the years. He was my next-door neighbour, and I made it my business to get to know him personally. Ostensibly, not many people knew about our friendship, as most people assumed that Russell Dyer had no friends at all, but they'd have been wrong about that. Russell confided in me that his sister Caitlin Dyer had been piling on pressure for him to give her half of the family estate that their father had left him, as she felt half of everything, by rights, belonged to her.
"I would give her half the money," he told me in earnest. "You know me, Verity. I'm not interested in money of any kind anyway. I've never been interested in material stuff. If I was that way inclined, I would have knocked this cabin down a long time ago and built in its place a grandiose mansion, but that is not for me. I love this cabin very much. I have so many indelible happy memories of my childhood spent here with my parents, who were very good people, you know."
Russell informed me that from about the age of 4 years old, Caitlin Dyer went completely rogue, defying everything that their parents did.
"She was the bad egg in our family, poisonous and toxic, you could say. And although my parents loved her very much, she certainly didn't make it easy for them. I don't have any desire to give any of my father's estate to my sister. She doesn't deserve a penny of it," Russell confided in me. "My father warned me after his death that she'd come sniffing around his estate like a rat over the rotting food in a dumpster, and sure enough she did just that, as my father had predicted. He told me under no circumstances to give her a dime of the family estate, and I promised faithfully I would oblige his every request. I think my father was very aggrieved with how Caitlin never so much as sent them a postcard over the years. She never got in touch. My parents never even knew that they were grandparents. It cut him to the quick, you know, that she pretty much stuck a finger up at me and my parents, as if she wanted nothing to do with us. My parents had shown Caitlin nothing but love over the years, but the hatred that Caitlin extended towards my family was palpable. I think she hated our family for not being the way she wanted us to be. If we'd been like the Kardashians, she'd have been very happy."
"Well, I don't blame your dad," I said. "She clearly wasn't interested in your family at all. And I can't believe she didn't even tell them that they were grandparents. That's devastating."
"Well, she had no interest in any of us, period. Let's just say that. She viewed us all with great contempt. If I gave her half of my father's fortune, she'd spend it all on herself anyway. The money would be whittled away on fancy cars and luxurious living. Beautiful holidays, you know what I mean. When the money could be put to some good causes that might make a difference to this world. She treated my parents abysmally growing up.
said Russell, closing his eyes tightly, as if trying to fight off some unpleasant memories he'd rather not entertain.
Caitlin kept throwing tantrums, calling my parents every perverse name under the sun that you can think of. It wasn't pretty. No daughter should talk to their parents with such disdain. I regularly recall my mother telling my sister to wash her mouth out with soap and water, as the dirty, vile language that came out of her mouth was so foul it was almost demonic. Caitlin was always rebellious when we were young. We were both at loggerheads with each other. I hated the objectionable way she treated my parents. She'd stick her tongue out at them at every given opportunity, telling them all the time how much she hated them. My parents were always being called around to the local school on Caitlin's account to see the headmistress there, in order to discuss Caitlin's antisocial behaviour towards the other pupils, her temper tantrums, her violent outbursts. Let's just say Caitlin was known for pulling people's hair and kicking them in the teeth. My parents weren't social people, so these were rather unfortunate rendezvous with the headmistress. I think her name was Mrs. Mackerfield. I think this was very much out of their comfort zone. Mrs. Mackerfield would inform my bereft parents that Caitlin was involved in some kind of spat and was always getting into physical fights with other children and causing chaos wherever she went, upsetting teachers and just being a general nuisance, so to speak, almost as if she took great delight in ruffling everybody's feathers, like a fox in a chicken coop. My parents could not understand why Caitlin had turned out the way she did. She had a good upbringing, you see, and they did the best to make her grow up to be kind and respectful towards others, but she was always defiant. The more they reprimanded her or corrected her, the more she played up. My mother really just finally gave up, I think. She kept blaming herself, thinking she'd done something wrong in the way she'd raised Caitlin. My parents wondered if they'd been too easy on her, perhaps, letting her get away with too much, so to speak. But as far as I was concerned, Caitlin's stinking attitude was not my parents' fault at all. So there we are. That is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.